Daniel slammed his fist on the polished conference table. What do you mean I can't touch a single dollar? The room fell silent. The family lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked directly at him. I'm simply reading your grandfather's final wishes. Victoria, Daniel's stepmother, hid a smile behind her hand. Brian, Daniel's stepbrother, leaned back in his chair with a grin. The lawyer continued. Daniel Carter shall inherit the Carter family estate, companies, and all associated assets only if he legally marries an honest woman from a humble background and remains faithfully married to her for 1 full year. Daniel blinked. You're joking. I'm not. If the marriage ends before 1 year, the lawyer added, the entire inheritance will pass to Victoria Carter and her son, Brian. Brian laughed. Looks like Grandpa finally figured you out. Victoria sighed dramatically. Poor Daniel. Billions of dollars. Gone because he never learned what love is. Daniel shot them a cold stare. This is ridiculous. The will is legally binding, the lawyer replied. You have 30 days to marry.
You have 30 days.
Daniel stormed out without another word. Outside, rain poured over the city. His closest friend, Michael, hurried after him. What are you going to do? Daniel unlocked his car. I'm getting married. Michael frowned. To who? Daniel looked into the distance. I don't know yet. But she'll only be my wife on paper. 3 days later, Daniel drove far beyond the city. Luxury buildings slowly disappeared. Smooth roads became dusty paths. Small farms stretched across the countryside. Children chased each other barefoot, laughing. Michael looked around. You really think you'll find your future wife here? Daniel kept driving. My grandfather said an honest woman. Honest women aren't hiding in luxury hotels. Hours later, they reached a quiet village. As Daniel stepped out of the car, shouting echoed nearby. Please, don't cry. A little boy stood beside an overturned basket of tomatoes. Fresh tomatoes rolled across the road. An elderly woman bent down, struggling to help him. Before anyone else moved, a young woman rushed over. It's all right, she said softly. Together, they gathered every tomato. When the basket was full, she reached into her own bag and added several more. The little boy looked surprised. But, these are yours. She smiled. You need them more today. Daniel watched quietly. The elderly woman whispered to her. Grace, you've already helped enough people this week. Grace shrugged. If I still have something to give, then I still have enough. Daniel couldn't stop watching. She wasn't pretending. Nobody even knew he was there. Michael leaned closer. I think you've found her. Later that afternoon, Daniel approached her vegetable stall. Grace greeted him with a warm smile. Good afternoon. What would you like? Daniel looked at the vegetables without answering. Instead he asked, do you always help strangers? She laughed lightly. Not always. Only when they need it. You don't know who I am. She shook her head. No. And it doesn't matter. Daniel folded his arms. What if I told you I was rich? Grace smiled again. I'd still charge you for the vegetables. For the first time in months, Daniel almost smiled. My name is Daniel. I'm Grace. I have a strange question. She raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Will you marry me? Grace froze. The women selling nearby vegetables burst into laughter. One whispered, the city man has lost his mind. Grace stared at him. You've known me for 5 minutes. I know. And you're asking me to marry you? Yes. She folded her arms. No. Daniel expected negotiation. Not rejection. I'll pay you. No. I'll make you comfortable. No. I'll change your life. Grace's smile disappeared. I'm not interested in selling my life. She picked up another customer's basket. Our conversation is over. Daniel walked away. Michael shrugged. That didn't go well. No. But she said no without asking how much. Exactly. That evening, Daniel saw Grace again. She sat outside a small house beside an elderly woman lying on a wooden bed. The old woman struggled to breathe. A village doctor quietly packed his bag. Grace asked, "Please tell me the truth." The doctor sighed. "She needs surgery. Without it." He couldn't finish the sentence. Grace lowered her head. "How much?" The amount made her eyes fill with tears. "I don't have that." After the doctor left, Daniel remained hidden outside the gate. He watched Grace hold her grandmother's hands. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I've tried everything." Her grandmother smiled weakly. "You've already done enough." Grace shook her head. "No, there has to be another way." Daniel quietly walked away. The next morning, he returned. Grace looked surprised. "I thought I already answered your question." "You did. I'm asking again." She sighed. "I told you. I know about your grandmother." Grace's expression changed instantly. "You were watching us." "I wasn't spying. I happened to be there." He handed her an envelope. Inside was the exact amount needed for the surgery. Grace looked shocked. "I can't accept this." "You can. What do you want in return?" Daniel answered honestly. "A 1-year marriage." Silence filled the air. Grace looked at her grandmother's room. Then back at the envelope. "I won't pretend to love you. I'm not asking you to. When the year ends, we go our separate ways." Daniel nodded. "Agreed." She looked at him for several seconds. Finally, she whispered, "I'll do it." If you're already wondering whether this marriage can ever become real, take a second to subscribe to the channel, because this is only where their journey begins, and the biggest betrayals are still ahead. 2 weeks later, Grace stood in a simple white wedding dress. Daniel adjusted his suit. The ceremony lasted less than 20 minutes. No romance. No laughter. No promises beyond the legal vows. As they left the church, Victoria watched from her car. Her face hardened. She turned to Brian. "That village girl just stole everything that belongs to us." Brian smiled coldly. "Then we'll make sure she never stays married for 1 year." He looked straight at Grace. "Let the game begin." Grace had barely stepped into the Carter mansion when a maid hurried over. "Welcome, Before Grace could answer, Victoria's sharp voice echoed through the entrance. "Don't call her." Everyone turned. Victoria walked down the grand staircase with Brian beside her. "She's only here because of a ridiculous condition in an old man's will." She looked Grace up and down. "I've seen better dressed women selling fruit on the roadside." Several relatives laughed. Grace lowered her eyes but remained silent. Daniel stood beside her without saying a word. Victoria smiled. "Daniel, are you ashamed already? We'll see how long this little experiment lasts." Grace quietly picked up her small bag. "Could you please show me my room?" she asked one of the maids. Victoria laughed. She didn't even argue. Brian smirked. "She's smarter than she looks." That night, Grace unpacked the few clothes she owned. Daniel knocked once before entering. "You'll have your own room." She nodded. "I expected that. You'll have everything you need." "I don't need much." Daniel hesitated. "If my family says anything." Grace smiled gently. "They already have. They're angry." "I understand." "You don't have to understand." She looked at him calmly. "People who are afraid of losing something often hurt others." Daniel frowned. "You always talk like that." "My grandmother says kindness costs less than revenge." Daniel didn't reply. He simply walked away. The next morning, Grace woke before sunrise. She wandered into the kitchen. The cooks looked surprised. Why are you here?" "I wanted to make breakfast." One cook laughed nervously. "We're paid to do that." Grace smiled. "Then let me help." Within an hour, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread, fried eggs, and vegetable stew. The workers gathered around. One elderly cleaner whispered, "Nobody from this family has ever asked how we're doing." Grace handed her a warm plate. "Then today's a good day to start." Word spread through the mansion faster than anyone expected. By lunchtime, nearly every servant was smiling. Victoria noticed immediately. She called the head maid into her office. "Why is everyone suddenly so cheerful?" The woman hesitated. "It's Mrs. Carter." Victoria's face darkened. "Which Mrs. Carter?" "Grace." Victoria slammed her teacup onto the table. "I've been running this house for years. She arrives yesterday, and everyone suddenly loves her." The maid remained silent. "Get out." Across town, Daniel sat through another board meeting. Executives argued over falling employee morale. One manager sighed. "People are exhausted." Another shrugged. "They're employees. They're replaceable." Daniel had always agreed with that thinking. Until now. For some reason, Grace's words returned to him. People who are afraid of losing something often hurt others. He ended the meeting early. When he returned home that evening, he found something unusual. The security guards were laughing. The gardeners were smiling. Even the housekeepers looked happier. One guard noticed Daniel. "Good evening, sir." Daniel stopped. "You look happy." The guard scratched his head. "Your wife brought us dinner." Daniel stared. "She cooked for all of you?" "Yes, sir." "No one has ever done that." Daniel walked inside. He found Grace sitting on the floor with the elderly gardener. The old man held a faded photograph. "My wife planted every flower here before she passed away." Grace listened quietly. "They're beautiful. I've been trying to keep them alive." She smiled. "I think she'd be proud." The old man's eyes filled with tears. Daniel stood in the doorway, unnoticed. He had employed that gardener for almost 15 years. He had never even learned the man's name. Grace stood and finally noticed Daniel. "You're home." Daniel looked at the gardener. "What's your name?" The old man looked surprised. "Samuel, sir." Daniel nodded slowly. "Thank you, Samuel." The gardener's face lit up. After Samuel left, Daniel turned to Grace. "You remembered his name after one conversation." She looked confused. "Shouldn't I?" Daniel had no answer. That weekend, Victoria hosted a lavish charity gala. The city's wealthiest families filled the mansion. Grace wore a simple but elegant dress. As she entered the ballroom, whispers spread immediately. "That's the village girl. She doesn't belong here. I heard she sold vegetables." Victoria walked onto the stage with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I'd like everyone to welcome the newest member of our family." Polite applause followed. Victoria continued. "Our Grace comes from a very humble background." More laughter. She snapped her fingers. "A little game." A waiter placed 5 expensive forks beside Grace's plate. Victoria smiled. "Grace, would you mind showing everyone which fork is used first?" The room became silent. Brian grinned. Daniel clenched his jaw. Grace looked at the table. She honestly didn't know. People began laughing. Someone whispered loudly, "Maybe she eats with her hands." More laughter. Daniel started to rise. Before he could speak, Grace gently smiled. "I'm sorry. I don't know." The laughter grew louder. She continued calmly. "But where I come from, we're taught that how people treat one another matters much more than which fork they use." Silence. Her voice remained steady. "If using the wrong fork makes me poor, then making someone feel small must make a person much poorer." The ballroom fell completely quiet. Several guests lowered their eyes. One elderly businessman slowly began clapping. Another joined him. Within seconds, applause filled the room. Victoria's smile disappeared. Brian looked furious. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off Grace. For the first time in years, he felt proud of someone. Later that night, Daniel found Grace standing alone on the balcony. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She looked surprised. "For what?" "I should have defended you." She smiled faintly. "You don't owe me an apology. I brought you into this." "Yes. And my family keeps hurting you." Grace looked out at the stars. "My grandmother always says, hurt people often try to hurt other people." Daniel leaned against the railing. "Do you ever get angry?" She laughed softly. "Of course. So why don't you fight back?" "Because I don't want to become the kind of person who enjoys winning by hurting someone else." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Before he could speak again, his phone rang. It was Michael. "Daniel, where are you?" "At home." "Get to the office now. Someone has hacked one of the company accounts. Millions are missing." Daniel's expression changed instantly. "I'll be there." As he rushed away, Brian watched from the shadows with a slow, satisfied smile. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned. If you're enjoying the story so far, let me know in the comments. Do you think Daniel should have defended Grace from the beginning, or was he too blinded by his family? And don't forget to like the video, it really helps the channel grow. Daniel arrived at the company before sunrise. The finance director rushed toward him. "We've traced the missing money." "Where is it?" The man swallowed hard. "It was transferred through an account connected to your wife's name." Daniel froze. "That's impossible." "I thought so too. But all the documents are here." He handed Daniel a thick file. Every signature looked genuine. Every transfer appeared legitimate. Daniel stared at the papers, unable to believe what he was seeing. At that same moment, Brian quietly smiled from his office. "This is the end of your perfect little marriage." An hour later, Grace was called into the boardroom. She walked in, confused. "Daniel, what's happened?" He pushed the file toward her. "Tell me the truth." She opened it. Her face turned pale. "I've never seen these papers before." "The money disappeared." "I didn't take it." "Then explain why your name is on every transfer." "I don't know." Brian stood up. "How convenient." Victoria shook her head dramatically. "We welcomed you into this family, and this is how you repay us." Grace looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes. "You know me. I would never steal." Daniel wanted to believe her. But the evidence was overwhelming. For several painful seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Grace lowered her head. "I understand." She slowly removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table. "I'm not leaving because I'm guilty. I'm leaving because trust cannot survive where doubt has already taken its place." She looked at Daniel one last time. "I hope one day you discover the truth." Without another word, she walked out. Daniel watched her leave but couldn't make himself stop her. 3 days later, the mansion felt strangely empty. The servants no longer laughed. The kitchen was silent. Even Samuel's garden looked neglected. Daniel walked through the house and realized Grace had been the heart of it. Michael entered carrying a flash drive. "You need to see this." "What is it?" "I didn't believe Grace was guilty. So I asked the IT department to recover deleted security footage." Daniel inserted the drive into his computer. The video began to play. It showed Brian entering the finance office late at night. He copied Grace's identification documents. He forged digital approvals. Then he transferred the money into hidden accounts before linking everything to Grace. Daniel's face lost all color. Another video appeared. Victoria stood beside Brian. "No one will question the village girl." They both laughed. Daniel slammed his laptop shut. "I drove away the only person who ever cared about me." Michael nodded quietly. "So what are you waiting for?" Daniel didn't answer. He was already running. Hours later, his car stopped outside Grace's small village. He searched everywhere. Finally, he heard children's laughter beneath a large mango tree. Grace sat on a wooden bench, teaching a group of children to read. Her grandmother rested nearby, smiling proudly. Grace looked up. She saw Daniel. The children noticed him too. Teacher, do you know him? Grace answered softly, yes. I know him. The lesson ended, and the children ran home. Daniel slowly approached. I'm sorry. Grace remained silent. I should have trusted you. You should have. I was wrong. Yes. I've exposed Brian and Victoria. They've been arrested for fraud. Grace looked surprised but said nothing. Daniel's voice trembled. I married you because I wanted an inheritance. I thought money was everything. He shook his head. But after you left, I realized the mansion was only a building. My company was only a business. My money meant nothing. You were the one who made my life worth living. Tears filled Grace's eyes. Daniel knelt before her. I'm not asking you to come back for the inheritance. I'm asking because I love you. For the first time in my life, I know what love really is. Grace looked toward her grandmother. The old woman smiled gently. I told you, child. A good heart always finds its way home. Grace turned back to Daniel. I forgive you. But if we start again, it won't be because of a contract. Daniel smiled through his tears. It'll be forever. 1 year later, Daniel officially received his inheritance. Reporters expected him to announce another luxury project. Instead, he stood beside Grace in the same village where they had first met. Behind them stood a newly built school, a modern health clinic, and a community library. Daniel smiled as children filled the playground. My grandfather didn't leave me this fortune to make me richer. He left it to make me a better man. Grace reached for his hand. This time, neither of them let go. Sometimes, the greatest blessings arrive wearing dusty sandals instead of expensive shoes. Sometimes, the person the world calls ordinary is the one who changes everything. And sometimes, the inheritance that transforms your life isn't money at all. It's the person who teaches your heart how to love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this, subscribe for more emotional stories every week, and tell us in the comments, do you believe true love can change a person's life, no matter how they met?